Listen, I know you love Robbie the Robot, except Forbidden Planet doesn't count. Well, it's because it doesn't use the original text. No, it's just based on The Tempest. It's not actually... Oh, hey. Welcome to Teacup For One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and today we are talking about one of my favorite things ever, Shakespeare movies. Please don't turn off the video, I need the watch time. Now, I love Shakespeare movies because they're like the sweet spot where the Venn diagram of my 2 degrees just meet. And I think the appeal for Shakespeare with me, and for the rest of the world, whether they care to admit it or not, is the fact that these stories and these characters are so timeless, and they prove that humans have not changed in over 500 years. And on top of that, these texts are so rich with possibilities for countless interpretations, and I think that's why Shakespeare lends itself to film so well. But that said, Shakespeare is also pretty difficult to adapt to film, partially because the world has a very clear sense of what the right way to interpret a Shakespeare play is, and by world, I mean Shakespearean scholars and the actors who worship them. Seriously though, an actor's process of scanning through his speech and breaking down the iambic pentameter and looking for character clues in the text, that is an interpretation. An editor's choice to adjust the punctuation when adapting the text from the first folio edition into their own edition for publication is an interpretation. And a filmmaker adapting these texts into a medium that didn't exist when they were originally written, that's the best kind of interpretation. And that's what we are here to talk about today, because I'm going to share with you my top 5 Shakespeare films. Just to give you an idea of how I narrowed it down to these 5 films, this was my criteria. First, these films had to be based on the original text, so they couldn't be inspired by the stories of the plays, so you're not going to see anything like West Side Story, Lion King, or 10 Things I Hate About You. Second, they had to utilize the unique qualities of film as a visual medium to tell the story in a way that couldn't be done on stage. So that eliminates any and all recorded stage production. And number 3, it couldn't annoy me, so that eliminates everything by Kenneth Branagh. I'm just kidding. Well, actually I'm not. There's no Branagh on this list. Moving swiftly along. Number 5, Joss Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing. What, Matt? You picked Joss Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing over Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing? Yes. Yes, I did. And I have my reasons. Now, first of all, I will give credit where credit is due. Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson are the textbook people that you would want to play Benedict and Beatrice. Like, they're perfect.
I wonder that you will still be talking, Signor Benedict. Nobody marks you.
What, my dear Lady Disdain? Are you yet living?
But the Whedon film has a very special, unique kind of magic to it. The entire thing was shot in just under 2 weeks at Joss Whedon's house shortly after he had finished wrapping The Avengers. This was how he decided to spend his vacation time. And the film includes lots of his frequent collaborators such as Amy Acker, Nathan Fillion, and Clark Gregg. These are mostly film and TV actors who I don't believe have as much experience with classical text. I think the only classically trained and professional actor in the entire film plays the priest during the wedding scene, and there's a very notable difference in how effortlessly he speaks Shakespeare's words up against the rest of the cast. But with that said, this group of performers adds a really beautiful subtlety and nuance to these characters that are very accustomed to being portrayed as, like, larger than life.
Here comes Beatrice. By this day, she's a fair lady.
Here comes Beatrice. By this day, she's a fair lady.
It makes the characters a lot easier to fall in love with and consequently care about. But the reason I love this movie so much is because it's the Hollywood equivalent of getting your friends together with a camera and making a movie over the weekend. Like, the reason that Shakespeare is so good is because it doesn't take anything more than a group of actors and the text to put on the play. That's why Shakespeare in the Park is so good and so successful, and this movie is basically the filmic equivalent of that. Number 4, Michael Almereda's Hamlet, also known as Hamlet 2000, also known as the Ethan Hawke Hamlet, and I am going to make a bold statement right here, right now. Brace yourselves, get ready to clutch your pearls. Ethan Hawke is the best on-screen Hamlet ever. No disrespect to Kenneth Branagh.
Treacherous! Lecherous! Kindless man!
The appeal to the text is the fact that this is a character who is experiencing a tidal wave of emotions, and they're all emotions that everyone will experience or already has experienced at some point in their life. This is the Hamlet movie where Hamlet is actually a relatable human being, and not just this stone-faced, stoic, brooding creature.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Now, this movie does a lot of stuff right, and it has a lot of clever ways to bring the story into a contemporary setting, but I think the highlight of this film, at least for me, is how it uses voiceover. Hamlet is famous for his soliloquies, or speeches that give the audience some insight into what's going on inside his head. When you're on stage, all it takes is having the actor standing alone in isolation and speaking to the audience. But when you try to replicate that in a film, it comes off kind of clunky. This movie does something that should be so obvious for any filmmaker adapting Hamlet. Something that is so simple, yet so effective. It uses voiceover for the majority of the soliloquies. Using voiceover for the soliloquies is such a brilliant move because then you get to watch Hamlet exist silently, either in his room or walking through a blockbuster, and you're hearing all of these complex thoughts, but visually, you're just seeing him going through the motions of living his everyday life, and it really brings us into that introspective headspace that makes the play so compelling, and it does it in a way that is so unique to film.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
And the movie does a lot of other great stuff too, like how it uses technology either as a means of spying on Hamlet or to reveal the ghost, and don't even get me started on casting Bill Murray as Polonius.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be. For loan oft loses both itself and friend.
Oh, Bill Murray as Polonius, that's great. Number 3, Baslerman's William Shakespeare's Romeo plus Juliet. Full disclosure, Baz Luhrmann is not my favorite director, and Romeo and Juliet is not my favorite Shakespeare play. But I can't deny that a lot of choices made in adapting this to film were brilliant. First of all, it does a brilliant job of moving this play into its contemporary setting. From the moment at the beginning of the film when they say draw your sword and then it cuts to a close-up of the gun that's engraved with the word sword, you know that Baz Luhrmann is building a world in which this play is going to exist seamlessly. And that's really one of the big strengths of this film, is that it assigns familiar, relatable counterparts to the more archaic elements of the original text. For example, look at the Queen Mab speech. You could spend an entire high school English class just devoted to explaining the mythology in the Queen Mab speech that would have been familiar to an Elizabethan audience, that they wouldn't have needed explanation for, but could have used to better understand Mercutio, his character, and in turn, his relationship to Romeo. But in this film, all you need to do is establish that Queen Mab is a drug. And then all of a sudden you understand Mercutio, his instabilities, and then Romeo's relationship to him almost as a pseudo-caretaker.
Peace, good Mercutio, peace. Thou talkst of nothing.
True. I talk of dreams.
And the other thing I love about this movie is that it utilizes Shakespeare's original text, but it is not precious with it whatsoever. There are sequences that use a single line of text as part of a montage to convey the same information that requires an entire speech on stage. There are moments when there's literally no text and it's just visuals suggested by the story, underscored by beautiful music expressing the same emotional sentiments. And then finally, this movie is very liberal with just chopping the text up and then moving lines into places where they don't exist in the original play. What Luhrmann does with the death scene is amazing. Rather than just have Romeo die and then Juliet wake up, discover his dead body, and then kill herself, he has Juliet wake up the second Romeo takes the poison. So they deliver their last lines to each other while Romeo is dying.
Drunk call and left no friendly drop to help me after. I'll kiss thy lips. Place some poison yet doth hang on them.
It makes that scene so much more poignant when those words are being spoken as a dialogue instead of one person speaking to the other's lifeless body. And on top of that, it heightens the tragedy and very impressively manages to surprise the audience with an ending that they all knew was coming. You know, if Leo's acting was better, this movie probably would have come in second or even first on my list.
Then I defy you, stars!
Moving on. Number 2. Ralph Fiennes' Coriolanus. Oh, this movie is so good. It's the directorial debut of Ralph Fiennes, who also stars as the title character, who may be best known for his breakthrough performance as he who shall not be named, Lord Voldemort, in the Harry Potter franchise. Now, the reason I'm ranking Coriolanus above Baslerman's William Shakespeare's Romeo plus Juliet is because, well, I mean, part of it is personal preference, but on top of that, it's because this film does seemingly the impossible. It puts Shakespeare into a contemporary setting and makes it feel completely natural. It doesn't rely on creating a heightened reality to justify the heightened nature of the text. Even though it's not one of Shakespeare's more familiar plays, anyone can watch this film and understand what's happening coherently from start to finish. And that's because it uses a lot of the same tactics that we see in Baz Luhrmann's William Shakespeare's Romeo plus Juliet to contemporize the play to a modern setting, but it's just not as showy about it. I'm also trying to steer clear of saying, oh, the acting is amazing for all these films, because yes, that should be a given. But this movie is led by Ralph Fiennes, Jessica Chastain, and Vanessa Redgrave. These are 3 of the best actors of their respective generations. They are a special breed of actor who have established careers in Hollywood, but have the foundation of a classical theater resume. So they know how to bridge those 2 worlds, and I think that's part of the reason why this movie feels so effortless and so naturalistic, because they know how to just speak this beautiful, rich language and make it sound as natural as anything.
I have sat too long.
Nay, go not from us thus. If it were so that our request did tend to save the Romans, thereby to destroy the Volskis whom you serve, thou mightst condemn us as poisonous.
And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you have all been waiting for, my number 1 Shakespeare film of all time, Julie Taymor's Titus. This is a film from 1999 based on William Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, directed by Julie Taymor, the visionary director who directed The Lion King for Broadway. The Puppet Lady. Now, this is a movie that people either love or hate, and it's based on a Shakespeare play that pretty much has the exact same reputation. Titus Andronicus is one of Shakespeare's earliest plays and his bloodiest. There are 14 deaths. 9 of them happen on stage. Multiple body parts get cut off. A tongue is cut out. Oh, and there's cannibalism. Titus is a tricky text. There's no doubt about that. But I think the reason that Titus has stayed in our public consciousness all these years later is because beyond the blood, the gore, and the excess, this revenge tragedy is based in very real family tragedy.
Victorious Titus, spare my firstborn son!
Religiously, they ask a sacrifice.
Now, the movie doesn't diminish the pain or the tragedy whatsoever, but it does stylize it, which I think is so important when you're dealing with Titus.
This was thy daughter.
Why, Marcus, so she is.
And Julie Taymor really knows how to walk that line between excessiveness and groundedness. And this movie is really just perfect filmic theatricality. Another reason I love this film is because of the anachronistic setting. It doesn't take place in any one specific time or place. It's this dream-like world that encompasses all kinds of settings. The architecture is reminiscent of ancient Rome. The party scenes are like something out of The Great Gatsby. The wars are fought with swords, tanks, motorcycles. It's not that different from how Shakespeare wrote his plays. They could take place in ancient Rome or ancient Egypt, but he still had references to contemporary life in Elizabethan England. And that's one of the other things that I just love about Shakespeare, is that all of the texts take place in these beautiful, hyper-heightened realities that could be any time or any place and are just solely dependent on the characters. And this film does such a gorgeous job of creating that beautiful, dramatic space that sets this filmic interpretation apart from almost any other Shakespeare movie. And this is the only Shakespeare film I have seen to utilize direct address to the audience so effortlessly and effectively. Like, there's a scene about a third of the way through the movie when Taymor, played by Jessica Lange, is putting on a show and she's all smiles, and then she's subtly manipulating the king, and then she just slowly turns from the action of all the characters on this side of the frame, looks directly into the camera, and tells the audience, "I'll find a day to
massacre them all."
This is perfect filmic theatricality. She is separating herself from her own reality to share a secret with us, the audience, on the quietest, most intense, intimate level possible. And you can't do that on stage to an audience of 500 people. And there are about 1,000,001 other reasons why I think Taymor Titus is the greatest Shakespeare film of all time, but honestly, don't take my word for it. Watch it for yourself and let me know what you think. But, word of warning, once again, there is a lot of triggering context within the story, so I'd say just do a quick read on Wikipedia, familiarize yourself with the events of the play, and see if it's something that you'd be comfortable watching. And if so, please let me know what you think. But for now, friends, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup For One. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite Shakespeare film is. Did it make the list? Did it not? I'd love to know. Also, if you'd like to hear me ramble on more and more about Shakespeare, Disney, or Funkos, or occasionally droids, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It's super easy. All you need to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining us once again, everyone. My name is Matt, and that's the Teacup For One. Okay, go away.